Hello everyone, welcome to the course Animal Waste Management with a module named Animal Waste and Environment, Week 4, Lecture number 3, NGT Norms for Handling Animal Waste. Myself, Dr. Utkarsh Kumar Tripathi, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Veterinary and Animal Sciences, Rajiv Gandhi South Campus, Banaras Hindu University. Today we are going to deal in this lecture the National Green Tribunal, their establishment and their functional status and their procedures, how they are responsible for covering the cases and solving the issues related to the environmental and assessing the impact of different venture, different entrepreneurs, different factories and other things with the establishment of state government for the same and other laws which are related to the Environmental Protection Act, Water Act, Air Act and some other laws. So step by step we are going to deal with the National Green Tribunal and their laws and functions. So here we see that National Green Tribunal plays a crucial role in environmental protection in India, particularly concerning the management of animal waste. Established in 2010, the NGT was created to handle environmental dispute and ensure compliance with the environmental laws. Its primary objective is to provide a speedy resolution to the cases related to the environment issues, thereby safeguarding the environment and public health. If we talk about the background of this NGT, we see it here that it was actually founded on October 18, 2010 under the National Green Tribunal Act. And after the establishment, India became the third country globally after Australia and New Zealand to establish a specialized environmental tribunal. If we talk about the developing nations, it was the first country among all other countries which has been establishing institution which is responsible for environmental tribunal. Now what is the objective of this NGT? This ensures the effective and expeditious disposal of environmental cases and also to protect and conserve the environment, the forest and natural resources. Its jurisdiction handles civil cases which involves substantial questions related to the environment. It is having the power to provide relief and compensation for environmental damages. Here we see the unique feature of NGT, which operates with a focus on natural justice not bound by traditional civil procedure law, and it can take suo motu action on environmental issues. So what is the role of this NGT in environmental justice? Here we see that NGT aims to balance the ecological, economical and social considerations. It also acts as the critical player in enforcing environmental regulations and principles like sustainable development and the precautionary principle and the polluter which pays principle. So what is the significance of this NGT establishment? That it provides a faster, less formal and less expensive avenues of resolving environmental disputes. So ultimately we are saying that NGT is responsible to having the resolutions of environmental issues and environmental disputes. So it also reduces the litigation burden on higher courts while promoting accountability in environmental governance. So here we see that after the establishment of NGT, it has lessened the burden on higher courts related to the environmental disputes and the cases. Here we see that how NGT is handling the cases. We find that around 31% cases are related to the pollution, while 35% cases are related with the environmental impact assessment. If we summarize the National Green Tribunal, we find it that it was established in 2010 with the objective of the quick resolution of the environmental and natural resources cases. So what is the time period of these resolutions? It is supposed that the cases should be resolved within 6 months. So the places of sitting of this NGTs, so the headquarter, as we all know, that it is in New Delhi, and along with that the Bhopal, Pune, Kolkata and Chennai is also having its tribunal. So what is the structure of this NGT? Here is having the chairperson, the judicial members and the expert members. The tenure for the NGT members is up to 5 years until the age of 65, and there is no any case of reappointment. So the appointment, that the chairperson is central government with the CGI is constitutional, and 10 to 20 judicial member and 10 to 20 expert members with the selection committee. And here we see the very peculiar thing that, as we have already discussed, that India is the third country globally after Australia and New Zealand obviously, and the first developing nation to establish a specialized environmental tribunal like NGT. If we see the power and jurisdiction of NGT, we find that the jurisdiction of this NGT is the civil cases on environmental issues. So ultimately it deals with the civil cases which are attached with some kind of environmental issues, and suo motu power which has been granted to the NGT in year 2021, and the rules it adjudicatory and prevention and remedial. So the what is the procedure? That the it follows the principle of natural justice, which is not bound by the CPC 1908 or Indian Evidence Act 1872. And how NGT deals with the civil cases? We find it here that NGT is dealing the cases under the Water Act, that is the Water Prevention and Control Pollution Act 1974. Thereafter, the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Cess Act in 1977, the Forest Conservation Act in 1980, the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981, and the Environment Protection Act 1986. Along with that, the Public Liability Insurance, which was established in 1991, and the Biological Diversity Act 2002. So under these laws, under these acts, rule and regulation, NGT make the issue resolved as soon as possible, which are related with the environmental issues. So here we see that what are different laws and institutions related to the environment protection in India. We find on the top, on the summit, this is the National Green Tribunal, which was established in 2010, and with the purpose that under the National Green Tribunal Act 2010 to provide a specialized forum for expedition disposal of cases related to the environmental protection and conservation of natural resources. It works under various acts like Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, which was constituted in 1974 with the purpose that for the prevention of control of water pollution and the maintaining of restoring of wholesomeness of water. It established the Central and State Pollution Control Board to oversee the compliances, and along with this the Air Act, which is actually the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, which was established in 1981 with the purpose to abate the air pollution in India, empowers the Central and State Pollution Control Board to set air quality standard and monitor the compliances related to the air pollution. If we talk about the other laws, the very important law is Environmental Protection Act, which was constituted in year 1986 with the purpose for the protection and improvement of the environment and for matters connected to that environment protection. This act serves as an umbrella legislation that enables the government to take measures of environmental conservation. The next, like this only, that the Forest Conservation Act, which was constituted in 1980 with the purpose that to regulate the diversification and the divergence of forest land and non-forest purpose, and aims to conserve the forest by establishing a framework for their sustainable management. Thereafter, the Biological Diversity Act, which was constituted in year 2002 with the purpose to protect the India's biological diversity and to promote its sustainable use and ensure fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of biological resources. So if we talk about the next law, that is Public Liability Insurance Act, which was constituted in year 1991 with the purpose to provide the public liability insurance for the purpose of providing immediate relief to the person affected by accident occurring while handling hazardous substances. So here we see that the effective management of animal waste is very much important, otherwise NGT may issue some guidelines for the person who is hampering the laws. So what are the different importance of managing? It's vital for several reasons, that if there is no effective management of animal waste, then there may be some kind of environmental hazardous issues. So environmental protection is very important for us, and improper disposal of animal waste can lead to the significant environmental issues, which include the water pollution, the soil degradation, the greenhouse gas emission. For instance, if we take some example, that the nitrogen from the manure can leach down in groundwater, while the phosphorus can run off into water bodies, which can cause as a result the eutrophication. and harming the aquatic ecosystem. Means thereafter the algal bloom will be there, because there is a plentiful of nutrition which has been leached out of the manure in the form of nitrogen as well as phosphorus, and thereafter that algal bloom which uh, disturb the aquatic life. Now the public health, if we talk about that, the animal waste can harbor the pathogens. So always the animal waste or agriculture waste after rotting can harbor some kind of pathogens that pose health risk to the humans as well as livestock. So the proper management practices are very essential to prevent the spread of disease out of this, and just to protect the community health and along with that the livestock health. If we talk about the soil health, that when the waste is managed well and correct way, then the animal waste can serve as valuable resources for enhancing soil fertility. It provides the essential nutrients that improve the soil structure and increase the water retention capacity of the soil, and in turn it also promotes the healthy crop growth. Along with this, if we are handling our animal waste in a better way, then there are n number of economic benefits. Like efficient animal waste management can lead to cost saving for farmers by reducing the need for synthetic fertilizer, and additionally the practice such as composting and anaerobic digestion can generate renewable energy and create organic fertilizer, turning waste into resources. So thereafter the regulatory compliances are there adhering to the NGT norms, which ensure that agricultural operation comply with environmental regulations, thus avoiding the legal penalties and promoting sustainable farming practices. So before we proceed further, it's better to know summarize the types of animal waste. Here we know that if we talk about the solid waste, we came to know that the dung and the bedding material, dung out of our livestock, that from cattle, buffalo, sheep, goat and pigs and other livestock and poultry always, and thereafter the bedding material which are provided for the animal for their comfort, for their welfare, and that can also be used as a waste for further use in some kind of composting, vermicomposting and other materials. If we talk about the liquid waste, here we see that urine and wash water can be utilized in the form of urine waste or liquid waste. You can say that urine, which is a significant component of liquid waste, which contain the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium and other nutrients, which can contribute to nutrient runoff if not managed properly, leading to the water pollution. If we talk about the wash water, that is the water used for the cleaning animals and our farm cleaning equipments, which may contain the organic matter, the pathogens and chemicals from cleaning agent, and it also requires the treatment before disposal to prevent the environmental contamination. If we talk about the carcass, that is the dead animals, here we see that the remains of livestock that have died from some disease, some injury or some other causes, it must be managed carefully to prevent disease transmission and environmental pollutions. If we talk about the disposal methods, that the common methods of this carcass, which include the burial method, the incineration method and the rendering method, or sometimes the composting method. The regulation often dictate the appropriate disposal method to ensure the public health and environmental safety. So what are the significance of animal waste management? Here we see that if we are handling the animal waste properly, then ultimately we are going to help to maintain the water quality for human consumption as well as for our livestock consumption as a drinking water. So the nutrient runoff, if we are not handling the animal waste properly, then the nutrient runoff will be there, means the leaching will be there, and which contaminate the water bodies, and this leaching and nutrient runoff will cause the eutrophication, which lead to the algal bloom and deplete the oxygen, which will ultimately harms the aquatic life and renders water unsafe for human consumption. If we talk about the soil health, here we see that excessive waste application lead to the nutrient imbalance. So the contamination with pathogens, what we are putting animal waste openly, here the contamination with pathogens affect the crop yield and food safety. If we talk about the air quality, the emission of greenhouse gases, mainly the methane and ammonia from the waste, and that will contribute the air pollution and climate change ultimately. So along with that, the public health risk is also attached with this improper disposal of our animal waste. Here we see that the pathogens in waste pose a serious health risk to humans. Improper handling and The contamination what we are putting with the animal waste can contaminate the food crops and water supplies, leading to the zoonotic disease outbreaks. So here we see what the NGT guidelines says about these animal waste handling and management. Here we see that NGT suggests the solid waste management in the form of the collection, disposal and composting. Like regular collection of the solid waste including manure and bedding is managed and mandated to prevent the odor and environmental pollution. Here we see that waste should be stored in designated areas that are well ventilated to minimize the harmful emissions, and the composting, encouragement of composting practices for solid waste to cover it and to convert it into valuable organic fertilizer, while the solid waste should be treated properly before disposal to ensure compliance with environmental norms. Regarding the liquid waste management, here we see that we are having the wastewater treatment. The guidelines emphasize the need for adequate treatment of wastewater generated from the animal housing and cleaning operations. The effluent must meet some prescribed standard before discharge to prevent the contamination of water bodies, and thereafter the judicious use of water is also mandated by NGTs, where the dairy farmers are encouraged to adopt the water conservation practices which ensure that water usage should not exceed the recommended limits per animal. If we talk about the carcass disposal, we see it here that the safe disposal methods should be applied for carcass disposal, and the proper disposal of carcass is mandatory from the NGT guidelines also, which specify the methods such as incineration and burial or rendering to prevent the disease transmission. So here we see that NGT guidelines says that we should apply the incineration method, the burial method and the rendering method for disposing our carcass. It should not be just thrown out in open, because that openly throwing carcass will cause some pathogens to disseminate here and there, and thereafter this may cause some zoonotic disease and problem to animal itself and thereafter human also. So the documentation and training here about that carcass disposal, states are required to establish the carcass retrieval team which are to be trained in biosecurity measures and safe disposal protocols. So thereafter the monitoring and compliance guidelines from the NGT, it shows that the regular inspection should be there, and the guidelines call for the regular monitoring of dairy farms by local bodies and pollution control board to ensure the compliance with waste management practices. And thereafter the environmental audits should be regular and frequent. So dairy farms are subjected to environmental audits to assess the adherence to waste management standard and identify areas for the improvement. And thereafter infrastructure development is also necessary to take care that the investment in such kind of facilities are also mandated by the NGT, which is responsible for waste disposal method like making some infrastructure for compost, for rendering and for disposing of our carcass, for disposing of our animal waste like construction of some biogas plant and other things that should be developed, and that is mandated also by the NGTs. So the guidelines encourage the investment in infrastructure for waste management, which includes the biogas plant, the composting facilities, and to enhance the sustainability in dairy operations. So what are different importance of sanitation and disinfection measures? Here we see that if we talk about the sanitation practice, we see that the regular sanitation measures are very critical in dairy farms to control disease spread and maintain a healthy environment. This includes cleaning surface that comes into contact with animal waste using appropriate disinfectants. The guidelines which emphasize the importance of disinfecting areas after waste removal, for instance sprinkling the crushed lime or using other disinfectants, which helps to neutralize the odor as well as the pathogens. If we talk about the disinfection protocols, here we see that disinfection should be performed regularly on all surface within the dairy premises including the feeding areas, milking equipment and animal housing. The proper disinfection always reduce the risk of zoonotic disease that can affect both livestock and humans. And also along with this, it is very essential to ensure that all equipment used in handling waste is cleaned and disinfected to prevent the cross contamination between different areas of the farm. If we talk about the environmental impact assessment, that is the requirement for improvement environmental impact assessment for new establishment is always mandatory. So what is the mandatory EIA? Here we see that the National Green Tribunal, that is NGT, mandates always that an environment impact assessment is required for various new establishment, particularly those that may significantly affect the environment, and this includes some projects like mining, thermal power plants, river valley projects, and major infrastructure developments like roads and airports. So EIA process, what it says, here we see that there are four major stages. The first stage is screening, which cover and that determine whether a project require an EIA based on its potential environmental impact. Thereafter, the scoping, which identifies the key issues and the impacts to be assessed and outlines the scope of IA study. Thereafter, the public consultation and consideration is also there as per the EIA process. Here NGT guidelines engages the local community and stakeholder to gather input on potential environmental impacts, and thereafter the appraisal. The next stage is appraisal, which involves the detailed assessment by expert committee, to evaluate the finding of EIA, which reports and make recommendation for the project approval or modification. So the legal framework, the EIA process is statutorily backed up by the Environmental Protection Act 1986, which provides the legal basis for conducting EIA in India. The first EIA notification was issued in 1994, establishing a mandatory requirement for environmental clearance for specific projects. Here we see the role of State Pollution Control Board, that is SPCBs, in monitoring compliance. So the compliance and monitoring in case of State Pollution Control Board, SPCB, are responsible for monitoring compliance with environmental regulations. Following the completion of the EIA process, they ensure that project adheres to the conditions set forth in their environmental clearance. And regular inspection, SPCB conduct regular inspection of project to assess their compliance with environmental norms. This include monitoring waste management practices, emissions, and adherence to mitigation measures outlined in the EIA report. Thereafter, the reporting requirement from the SPCB sites, it requires the project proponents to submit the compliance report and detailing their adherence to the environmental conditions. These reports are crucial for maintaining the transparency and accountability. So here we see that SPCBs set the transparency and accountability of the stakeholders in environmental management. And thereafter, the enforcement action. In case of non-compliances, the SPCB have the authority to take enforcement action, which may include imposing fines, revoking permits, or requiring corrective measures to mitigate the environmental damage. So here we see that SPCB are liable and authorized to pose the fine, and thereafter it can also revoke the permits which has been provided, and it can also enforce the stakeholder for the corrective measures to mitigate the environmental damages. So what are different infrastructure requirement for waste handling and treatment? Here we see that importance of infrastructure is very much, and it is also essential for effective waste management in dairy and livestock farming. This includes the facilities for the collection, storage, treatment, and disposal of animal waste to minimize environmental impact and ensuring public health. So what kind of infrastructure needed? So here we see that there are four types of infrastructure which is needed for treatment of our waste. The first one is the collecting system. So the efficient system for the regular collection of the solid and liquid waste, which includes the dung, urine, wastewater, and the bedding material, and thereafter collecting that waste, it should be properly stored. So the designated storage area are well ventilated and constructed to prevent leachate and contamination of soil and water resources. The covered storage is necessary to mitigate the odor and pest attractions. Thereafter, the treatment facilities, infrastructure for treating the waste before disposal or reuse, which includes the composting unit, the biogas plant, and effluent treatment plant, that ETPs, to process the solid and liquid waste effectively. Thereafter, the disposal site, the safe disposal site for the carcass and other hazardous waste material, which ensure the compliance with environmental regulation to prevent the contamination. The monitoring and compliances, here we see that the State Pollution Control Board, that is SPCBs, are responsible for conducting some regular audits of industries including dairy farms to ensure the compliances with environment regulations and the guidelines which are to set forth by the National Green Tribunal and the Central Pollution Control Board. So here we see that NGT acts along with the Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Board to maintain the environmental protection. So these audits assess the adherence to the environmental norms, which include the waste management practices, effluent discharge standards and overall operational compliances. Here we see that the CPCB, what PCB says, the CPCB conducts performance audits of SPCB to evaluate their effectiveness in monitoring the compliances. This includes the assessing the adequacy of the monitoring mechanism, the staffing level, the laboratory infrastructure and the ability to enforce regulations. Regular reporting from SPCB to CPCB is mandated to ensure the transparency and accountability in environmental managemental practices. So what are the different kind of penalties if there is case of non-compliance with the environmental norms? So here we see that what are different penalties for the non-compliance with environmental norms. Here we see there are two things. The first one is enforcement actions and the second one is the legal framework. In case of non-compliance with the environmental norms, SPCB have the authority to impose penalties on violators. This may include either the fine, suspension or operations or revocation of environmental clearance. The NGT has established the guidelines for imposing the environment compensation on entities that cause damage to the environment due to the non-compliances. This compensation is calculated based on the extent of environment harms caused. What is the legal framework for that non-compliances with the environmental norms? Here we see that the non-compliances can lead to the legal action against offenders, which include the prosecution under the relevant environmental laws. The NGT has the power to direct the SPCB to take necessary action against the repeat offenders or habitual violator. The enforcement of the penalties serves as a deterrent against the environmental violation and encourages the adherence to the establishment guidelines by the NGT. So here we see that NGT is establishing their action resolving the issues related to the environmental protection under the law of Water Act, Air Act, Biological Diversity Act, Forest Conservation Act and various other related laws, and ultimately puts its efforts to make the environment clean and clear and solve the issue regarding to the environment and its beneficial effect for us. Thank you.